He was born in Bremen, Germany at the end of the first decade of the 20th century and emigrated to Texas with his family when he was 7 years old. He was a good student, and after graduating from Texas A&M University in 1931 with a degree in science, he joined the Army and became a bomber pilot. He went on to further his education with advanced degrees in aeronautical engineering. After World War II, his interest in aeronautics blossomed and led to a career in the scientific and research field. He directed both the development of the ballistic missile program and the Air Force's initial space program, and did it all in a very short span of years.
I'd not only consider Schriever a visionary, I'd have to say that he might have been the preeminent visionary in terms of what the Air Force has become.
His name is Bernard A. Schriever, and he is a legend of air power. He was born Bernard Adolf Schriever in Bremen, Germany on September 14, 1910. His father, Adolf, worked as ship's engineer for the North German Lloyd steamship line and was interned when his ship was seized in New York in 1916. Shortly after that internment, Bernard, his younger brother Gerhard, and their mother Elizabeth joined him in the United States, and they settled in San Antonio, Texas. Unfortunately, tragedy struck in September 1918 when his father was killed in an industrial accident. So at a tender age, young Benny became the man of the house. As with many immigrants, the family faced hard times, but persevered. His mother worked as a housekeeper and sold sandwiches and cold drinks to golfers at Breckenridge Park Golf Course. Benny and his brother helped the family finances by doing chores and caddying. The Schrievers stuck together, worked hard, and became naturalized citizens. Benny excelled in school and graduated with honors from San Antonio High School. In 1931, he graduated from Texas A&M University with a Bachelor of Science degree in architectural engineering. Shortly after graduation, he accepted a reserve appointment in the field artillery, but found he was much more interested in aviation. He entered flight training at Randolph Field, Texas in June 1932, earned his wings, and was commissioned a second lieutenant in the Air Corps Reserve at Kelly Field, Texas the following June. From Kelly Field, Second Lieutenant Schriever was assigned to bombers, and over the next 4 years was stationed at March Field and Hamilton Field, both in California.
I can remember at March Field, we had a poker game going. We had about 10 players. We didn't, all 10, of course, didn't play at one time, but we usually played once a week, but often not quite that frequently. But who were playing in the game? We had Tui Spots, we had R. Aker, we had Clarence Tinker, and we had a group of lieutenants. I mean, you wouldn't have that sort of thing today, I don't think.
His active duty ended in mid-1935, and he was hired as the commander of Civilian Conservation Corps camps in New Mexico. In October 1936, he returned to active duty and was assigned to Albrook Field, Panama, where he was aide to the commanding general, Brigadier General George H. Brett. It was also at Albrook where he met his future wife, General Brett's daughter, Dora. In September 1937, First Lieutenant Schriever reverted into the inactive reserve to take a commercial pilot position with Northwest Airlines.
I guess that's the only time I ever played golf with Hap Arnold. When I was flying for Northwest Airlines, he flew into Seattle, that's where I was based, for a meeting with Bill Allen, who was the president and CEO of Boeing Aircraft. And he asked Bill Allen, would he arrange a golf game while he was there, and if Benny Schriever is available, how about getting him in the foursome? And it worked out that way. I was available. We played 18 holes of golf at the Seattle Country Club, and Arnold said, this is a true statement and shows you the kind of vision this man had. He said, look, I want to get every Air Force officer, Air Corps officer, been flying on the airlines back into the regular Air Force, because I want an all-weather Air Force. It his vision was such that we had essentially an all-weather Air Force in World War II.
He re-entered the regular Army Air Corps in October 1938 as a second lieutenant and was again stationed at Hamilton Field, California, where he was assigned to the 7th Bomb Group as a B-18 instrument flying instructor. A year later, the Schrievers moved to Wright Field, Ohio, where Lieutenant Schriever was assigned as a test pilot. While at Wright Field, he attended the Air Corps Engineering School, specializing in aeronautical engineering subjects, and graduated in July 1941. Upon graduation, the Schrievers went back to California, this time to attend Stanford University, where he earned his master's degree in mechanical engineering, aeronautical, and while a student at Stanford, he was promoted to captain. By now, World War II was in full swing, and Captain Schriever was immediately sent to the 19th Bomb Group in the Southwest Pacific. While in the theater, he flew 38 combat missions in B-17s and other aircraft while serving as the group's chief of maintenance. He was only a captain for 3 months. In January 1943, his meteoric career began in earnest, and by war's end, he was a full colonel and commander of the advanced headquarters of the Far East Air Force Service Command, where he directed all combat support functions for theater operations from bases in New Guinea, the Philippines, and Okinawa. With the war finally over, Colonel Schriever was brought back to the United States and became chief of the Scientific Liaison Section in the office of the Deputy Chief of Staff for Material in the Pentagon. While in this office, the young colonel was fortunate to work closely with the legendary Dr. Theodore von Karman, head of the Scientific Advisory Board. Von Karman took Schriever under his wing, introduced him to many leading scientists.
Von Karman, von Neumann, Edward Teller, and so forth were very. I developed very close relationships with all of those people during that period, from 1945 until 1950 or 49, late 49, when I went into the National War College, and then the Development Planning Office, right out of the War College back to the Pentagon again.
It was here that he devised a revolutionary method of analysis called Development Planning Objectives, or DPOs. The DPOs helped identify promising advances in technology and coordinated these advances to meet future operational requirements of the Air Force.
General Schriever was the right man at the right time to give us two things: a strategic, long-range rocket deterrent against the Soviet Union, and secondly, the capability to orbit the first Americans in space. And when we look at the work of General Schriever in the 1950s in building the ICBM force, we see here that Schriever draws on some of these projects, Toward New Horizons, a long-range forecasting project of the late 1940s. He draws upon some of the work that's taking place in the physics community to reduce the size and weight of nuclear warheads, and he puts this together to give us the nuclear-tipped ICBM.
The other person who's very important in this discussion is Trevor Gardner, who was the assistant to the Secretary of the Air Force. And he's the one who put Schriever in a position to realize the development of these weapons. Gardner and Schriever then set up a Teapot Committee, which was headed by von Neumann, and they handpicked the members of that committee. And they concluded that if a crash effort were undertaken outside the normal channels of the Air Force, that was free of institutional bias, then they could do that. And Schriever was in it every step of that way. And incidentally, Ramo and Wooldridge, Simon Ramo and Dean Wooldridge, who were young scientists who'd worked for Hughes Aircraft and developed missiles for them, were also in on this committee, members of the committee. So a lot of this was cooked in early on in the Eisenhower administration. The irony of it is that the Eisenhower administration came in with a program to cut the missile program, but then when they saw what the potential was of this thing, and they were supported enthusiastically by Schriever and Trevor Gardner and John von Neumann, then the Eisenhower administration decided that this was the way to go, to get more bang for the buck, in the words of Charlie Wilson, who was the Secretary of Defense, that development of ballistic missiles was something that would certainly help in the Cold War.
Gardner asked Schriever to take over the program. Schriever agreed, but only if he could have full authority to get the job done. By now, Schriever was a new brigadier general and was named assistant to the commander, Air Research and Development Command, in June 1954. 2 months later, the Western Development Division was created in Inglewood, California, and Schriever was named its commander. The assignment officially put him in the driver's seat to manage the ICBM program. Schriever proposed that the best way to proceed was to create a government-industry partnership. He prevailed, and in short order, 2 partnerships were formed to make the difference in the race for the ICBM. The partnership of Simon Ramo and Dean Wooldridge joined to create the Ramo-Wooldridge Corporation. At the same time, Schriever and Simon Ramo, who was chief scientist on the ICBM program, adopted yet another partnership.
At about the same time that the Ramo-Wooldridge Corporation began, the intelligence community decided that the Soviet Union was a real threat in creating an ICBM that would bypass the entire multi-billion-dollar defense system of the United States. And the ICBM program immediately became the #1 crash program.
Thrust at the center of a highly secret crash program, a program that was considered by many experts twice as complex as the Manhattan Project, Schriever, Wooldridge, and Ramo tapped into all the nation's technological resources, recruited the best and brightest from universities, government, and over 220 major companies. To maintain secrecy, now Major General Schriever and his Air Force team wore civilian clothes to work and operated out of the Ramo-Wooldridge facilities. Besides the urgent threat they were laboring against on national security grounds, the government industry team gave birth to the systems engineering and electronics that later spawned the field of space technology. For their advances, Wooldridge, Ramo, and Schriever all gained celebrity status in Time magazine in 1957.
Messrs. Thompson, Ramo, and Wooldridge worked extremely effectively with Schriever in terms of supporting the development of the ICBM force, and then going beyond this to support the development of satellite payloads, particularly early satellite reconnaissance payloads and military payloads for national security purposes.
In the area of weapons acquisition, Schriever and Ramo fashioned a new approach to systems engineering. For reasons of time and speed, they took what Ramo called a parallel approach, or working on all subsystems at once. Later known as concurrency, it was a very risky approach, but it paid off. To succeed, breakthroughs had to be achieved in missile guidance, missile structure, propulsion, flight control, and nuclear warhead weight, all at once. But just as the ICBM program began to take shape, the Department of Defense implemented cost-cutting measures which threatened the pace of the project. But the measures were quickly dropped after the Soviets launched Sputnik in October 1957, shocking the defense community and nation and adding a new sense of urgency to the ICBM program.
We had failures in the early days on all of our missiles, every one of them. The Atlas, the Titan, the Thor. The Minuteman was a success on the very first flight, all up. But that was, again, because we had a great deal of pressure on, and we took the risk of doing all 3 stages, the guidance, and the whole works.
Ultimately, the United States succeeded, and in the 1960s surpassed the Soviet Union and won the race for an operational ICBM and, as a byproduct, the space race. At the heart of these achievements were the government-industry partnerships conceived by General Schriever and exemplified by the teamwork of Schriever, Simon Ramo, and Dean Wooldridge. General Schriever's achievements over a relatively brief span as head of the ballistic missile programs included the development of a new class of weapon systems, a second generation on the way, and the frontiers of space well marked.
Roger, I understand our copy. He is outside of the spacecraft at this time. No, we're coming over the west end. I want you to come back in now.
In April 1959, Benny Schriever was promoted to Lieutenant General and named commander of the Air Research and Development Command. His command was vast, and he was now responsible for managing the widespread military, science, industry brainpower required to provide the Air Force with the military tools to do its job. To get the job done his way, General Schriever introduced his concept of concurrency to weapon system development and acquisition, the same concept that had worked so well for him at the Western Development Division.
This method of management certainly was not a happy thing for the assistant secretary's level, because we came in with a program every year and presented it to the Pentagon, and we didn't have any problems. We kept them informed, but we didn't have anybody that if he couldn't say yes, he couldn't say no. In other words, that in essence is what happened.
As before, he wanted complete control over the development and acquisition process. But he faced fierce opposition from the Air Materiel Command Commander, General Samuel Anderson, whose command controlled weapon systems production. Although the air staff in the Pentagon offered many compromise positions, none was accepted, and the disagreement went on for 2 years. The deadlock was broken when the Air Force was given the opportunity to be assigned full responsibility for all military space programs, but on the condition that it solve the split between Air Research and Development Command and Air Materiel Command. The Air Force Chief of Staff, General Thomas D. White, wasted no time in deciding in favor of Schriever when he established 2 new commands, Air Force Systems Command and Air Force Logistic Command. Schriever was promoted to 4-star general and made the first commander of the new Air Force Systems Command. He reached the goal of total control and was now responsible for research, development, procurement, and production actions required to place a complete aerospace system in operational use. Although General Schriever had reached the goal he sought for so long, the administration changed, and the philosophies of the Eisenhower administration were not shared by the Kennedy and Johnson administrations with regard to the pursuit of technological advances.
It's true that he was very frustrated with the McNamara administration's cancellation of many of the military programs. But the thing that really irritated Schriever was not so much the cancellation of those programs. That he could accept. I mean, that was within the purview of the Secretary of Defense. The thing that really irritated Schriever about McNamara's opus operandi was that he would do this without debate. There was no public debate. There was no institutional debate. It seemed as if this was just done unilaterally.
Schriever saw all the streamlining of weapon system development and acquisition that he enjoyed during the development of the ballistic missiles replaced once again with layers of review, or as he called it, paralysis by analysis.
Beyond this, General Schriever, of course, as head of Air Force Systems Command, was responsible for a very important long-range planning effort, Project Forecast. And Project Forecast and some of the spin-off efforts of Project Forecast brought to this country some tremendous things as well, one of which was the high-capacity, long-range global jet airlifter and the high bypass ratio turbofan engine. Basically, when we take a look at the modern air transport era, we see there, too, the legacy of some of the work of this remarkable man.
We had scientific community, we had industry, and we had military all involved in the project forecast. It would be very difficult to make such a study today because of conflict of interest problems. And I think it was a very good study.
General Schriever found the administration's defense policy of mutually assured destruction, which meant the United States would fix its numbers of strategic weapons in the belief the Soviet Union would do the same, as foolhardy. He also thought the autocratic rule of Secretary McNamara irksome, and he could no longer support the administration's defense policy. Thus, he voluntarily retired on August 31st, 1966, several years before his mandatory retirement date. Since his retirement, General Schriever has been in great demand as a consultant to civilian organizations looking to solve problems through systems engineering. He's also still a frequent unpaid advisor to the Air Force and Department of Defense.
We're not really moving fast enough as far as space is concerned. We still are living with that space business which says space for peaceful purposes. And in my book, the military is here for peaceful purposes, to keep the peace. We don't want to fight a damn war unless we're forced into it. And one way to keep the peace is to have a credible capability that these guys do not want to mess around with.
Although the name Falcon Air Force Base will always have a cherished place in the heart of aerospace warriors, it's fitting that we honor an American pioneer, a living legend, whose lifelong work made what we do in today's Missile and Space Force possible.
On June 5th, 1998, the Air Force Space Command's Falcon Air Force Base, Colorado, became Schriever Air Force Base, renamed in honor of General Bernard A. Schriever, the father of the ballistic missile and the Air Force's space program, a tribute rarely accorded a living person.
If one looks for the legacy of General Schriever today, all one has to do is go to the Cape or go to Vandenberg Air Force Base, because every time a military payload is put into orbit, every time a missile system leaves a launch pad, every time a commercial payload is placed in orbit, we are seeing there the legacy of General Schriever.
General Bernard A. Schriever was born in Germany, immigrated to America when he was 7, and rose to become a great American patriot. He had a long and distinguished career in the United States Air Force, and as the father of America's space program, is a true legend of air power.